Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another riveting scientific medical update from none other than myself, Dylan. For those of you who are new to the channel, thank you for stopping by and sitting through these very, very long updates that I do. Um, for those of you who are new to seeing this, my name is Dylan. I'm 33 from the Chicago South Suburbs. And for the last nearly decade, I've been struggling with this bizarre neuropathic pain, what came to be known as pudendal neuralgia. Pudendal neuralgia is pain in the distribution of the main nerve branch of the pelvis and the pelvic floor. I've had pretty much bizarre issues since I was a kid, but the most debilitating thing that has been happening with me is this nerve pain that has gotten worse in 2013. In March of 2020, I underwent a major controversial surgery called pudendal nerve decompression surgery, in which ligaments were severed and the peripheral nerve is followed along its entire pathway, and it is decompressed, the scar tissue is cleared, and I am about 2 years post-op from that surgery. It was a very long and grueling recovery. I tried many treatments prior to having surgery, none of which worked for me long term. So the surgery was definitely a last resort surgery. And finally, 2 years out, I'm starting to feel somewhat different. I do still struggle with neuropathic pain episodes after too much movement, after having bowel movements. And this really bizarre neuropathic pain was very debilitating on my life. I had to make a lot of changes in my life. I had to start working part-time instead of working full-time. I had to readjust and redefine what exercise meant to me. I had to do a lot of research, and come to find out that over the years, pudendal neuralgia was the least of my problems. In 2020, I started researching a little bit differently and discovered that I have had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome this whole time. And it's very, very understudied and underdiagnosed. So I basically came to this conclusion on my own, with research and, of course, with different specialists agreeing with my assessment after years and years of ruling things out, doing treatments. And for a long, long time, I ignored other symptoms that I had because of the nerve pain. The nerve pain got so bad and so in my face that I put a bunch of other stuff out of my control, and I wasn't really focusing on that. But after my vascular compressions, which I didn't discover until after decompression surgery, I realized that there is just way too many weird things happening with my body that don't really have an explanation for why they're happening. So I kind of dove deeper into Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a genetic connective tissue disorder that affects the skin, the blood vessels. Connective tissue is all in between your organs, so it's basically the glue and the support of your body. And if your connective tissue is different, hypermobile, it's going to cause your body to move in ways that it shouldn't be moving, and thus cause injury, easier injury. So things happening to me when I was a kid all the way up until now make a hell of a lot more sense, because I discovered what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome was. So in this update video, I'm going to talk about my most recent doctor's appointment. On May 17th, I took the drive with my parents to Indianapolis, Indiana to see Dr. Claire Francomano. She is a geneticist that works with the EDS Society, and she's one of the top geneticists in the country, if not in the world, that works on the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. This appointment was super, super important to me. I realized that I'm very privileged in the sense that not everybody has these types of opportunities to see somebody. Most people don't even ever get to a specialist that knows what EDS is. I'm lucky enough that I live near a major metro city, that at least the doctors that I was seeing had heard of pudendal neuralgia, and they had heard of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. They may have not been able to give me a lot of information on it, but they at least can recognize it. But not everybody is so lucky. So I discovered Dr. Francomano in my research, of course, and it took 2 years to get this doctor's appointment. It took 2 to 3 months just to get scheduled. She sees a lot of patients. Unfortunately, it's all out of pocket. Insurance is not covering it. So going into this appointment, I had no idea what to expect. I had ideas for what my diagnosis would be, but I obviously didn't want to make any assumptions. I really just wanted to get with her, to network with her, to see what her opinions are on some of these other comorbidities that I've been dealing with EDS. A lot of times with these comorbidities, you might come across a specialist who had heard of it or knows what it is, but unless they're specifically looking for something on imaging, they're not going to necessarily connect the dots together that it has to do with your connective tissue disorder. So you oftentimes have to come to them with the research and what they should be looking for to rule out. And had I known that, I would have wasted a lot less time over the last 10 years, but here we are today. So Dr. Francomano, excellent, knowledgeable, extremely detailed. When I first went into Dr. Francomano, I first met with a genetic counselor. I had a couple of genetic tests done. Basically, the only thing that you do with genetic tests in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is you rule out the 12 types that can be tested for, which are more rare. EDS is not a rare disorder. Hypermobility spectrum is not a rare disorder. It is rarely understood and rarely diagnosed. The most common type of EDS is hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and probably even more common is hypermobility spectrum disorder. HEDS and HSD are not more or less severe than each other. They just have different criteria to diagnose. The only way to diagnose these disorders is through a physical assessment. The physical assessment includes the Beighton score, which assesses your joint hypermobility in 5 different joints, or 4 or 5 different joints. And then there's the skin criteria, which they measure, certain components of your skin, internal components like other comorbidities that you have. So hypermobility is not the entirety of the physical assessment. So basically my goal with Dr. F was to have her eyes on my case and for her to look at everything. Prior to me coming in, she of course read my history and everything I submitted. They only ask for certain medical records upon going in. Most of the time people come in with this like big huge dictionary of things that they've done or whatever, their medical history. So when I met with the genetic counselor, she pretty much asked me what testing I've done. Now, this is a question I get a lot. I get asked a lot, how do I get genetic testing done to rule out the severe types of EDS? The most severe type, or the most life-threatening type, or one of the most life-threatening types of EDS is called Vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Today is Wear Red for VEDS Day. Vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is one of the most serious types. It affects 1,500 people to 6,500 people in the US, one of every of 200,000 people. It's very rare, but it's very important to have ruled out with genetic testing these other severe types of EDSs. And people always ask me, how do I do that? One way to do it, obviously, is to go to see a geneticist like Dr. Francomano. Like I said, a lot of times this takes years to get an appointment. However, you can get genetic testing done on your own. Invitae is a system that sends you a kit, and you send in the DNA sample, and they will rule out the most severe types of EDS, along with other connective tissue disorders like Marfan's and Lloyd-Steed syndrome. There's all these other connective tissue disorders you want to get ruled out. So schedule an appointment with a genetic counselor from Genome Medical, and they will order the tests for you as a physician. You cannot just go online and order them yourself. You have to see genetic counseling. So that's exactly what I did. And they looked over my testing and determined that, I don't need to go through Dr. Francomano's testing to rule out the other types of EDS. So that would be step one to do. And then obviously getting that hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorder diagnosis on paper is important. If you visit the EDS Society, there is a criteria, the physical assessment criteria, that you can print out and bring to any physician. Any physician can download it and diagnose you that way. Or obviously, like I said, the best bet is to see a geneticist who's familiar with the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes that can assess your hypermobility. So Dr. F assessed my hypermobility, and going into the appointment, I pretty much knew that I didn't meet the the Brighton score requirements. For someone my age, you need 5 points out of 9. For people who are older or over a certain age, I think you only have to have 4 points out of 9. Unfortunately, I only have 4 points. I am 33. I need to have 5. So I was literally 1 point away from receiving a hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome diagnosis. Now, it's of my opinion and a lot of other people's opinion that hypermobile spectrum disorder and HEDS, the most common 2 types of EDS, are in fact multiple genetic component EDSs. Now, what that means is once they discover the genes that are responsible for this type of EDS, they're probably going to discover that there are going to be additional types. There is a lab in South Carolina called Norris lab. Most people who are in the EDS world know about this. The Norris lab has discovered a new type of EDS. They are not going to be able to release what gene is involved in this type for another couple years. It takes a long time to publish these studies and get them in the medical journals. So we will stay tuned to hopefully have a new discovery. And as time goes on, they're going to keep discovering. There are so many different genes involved in the production and the synthesis of connective tissue. And collagen is not the only component of connective tissue. There is a lot of different molecular components of connective tissue, and anywhere in that process of synthesizing and creating these proteins could get interrupted genetically. So there's a lot of hope coming. I tell people all the time that we're going to probably have a lot of different types of EDS in the next 10, 15 years. So stay tuned. So Dr. F measured my hypermobility. My elbows are obviously the most disgustingly hypermobile of my body. And then I do have some hypermobility of the DIP and PIP joints of my fingers. She was kind of criticizing a little bit how I was holding my pen and asking me whatever, things like that. Growing up, like, people suspected that I had scoliosis, but upon examination from like chiropractic and all that, I don't have scoliosis. I have thoracic kyphosis, which is a different curvature of your spine. I've had a lot of dental issues as a kid. I have a high narrow palate. I have dental crowding. I've had to have 4 teeth removed out of my mouth because it just wouldn't fit. My gums are receding. My front teeth are hypermobile. These are all EDS things. Apparently I'm flat-footed. I didn't realize I was flat-footed, which is another thing. I have some ankle pronation, which is another thing going on. So the other major thing that Dr. F thinks about me is that I have 2 different additional genetic disorders. I had blood taken. I'm still waiting on testing to confirm these findings, and potentially going to see another geneticist at Indiana University which will be exciting for me because there's all these symptoms I've struggled with since childhood that I am now just starting to realize these were not normal symptoms. So the more awareness we spread about EDS, especially people looking to have children, does EDS run in the family, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't it be great if one day we had this genetic testing figured out so we can determine whether or not a child has EDS upon childhood, so that they wouldn't have to suffer as an adults, spend thousands of dollars trying to rule things out, et cetera, et cetera. And so the other thing that Dr. F and I went over is the mast cell component of my issues. So there's definitely a mast cell protocol that people should be following that have EDS, and potentially another genetic mast cell component to my issues. This involves taking antihistamines every day, Pepsid twice a day, sodium cromolene, I think, is the other one, and then following the antihistamine diet. So that's another thing we spoke about in particular. Dr. F also thinks that it's not a bad idea for me to have an upright MRI. It's very long overdue because of my neck issues. I have a lot of just spinal pain. It's mostly muscle soreness because it's very hard for me to sit upright for long periods of time. It really puts strain and pressure on my back. My connective tissue is not working properly, so my muscles are doing the job of the connective tissue and the muscles. So they're tightening around my organs to protect, and as a result my back is constantly sore. I'm constantly rubbing, and as a result also my neck is very, very stiff, and I also have some jaw issues going on, TMJ on my left side. And then the other thing that happens with people with EDS is that they have a craniosacral instability, which means the vertebrae that are in between that are supporting, or the connective tissue that's in between the vertebrae supporting, are moving outside of the appropriate range. So that is causing a lot of strain. So that is something that I need to research with potentially a new neurologist or neurosurgeon that I'm going to be working with in the future. The other thing is, because of my neuropathic issues in the sacral area, she thinks there may be a possibility that I have tethered cord, which is also another thing. It's the thickening of the connective tissue around the spinal cord in the sacrum. I have to have the way to see if that is the case is an MRI with prone and supine MRI, so that they can see where the cord is in space and time. So that's a whole other talk show. So basically, this appointment was just an amazing opportunity that I had. I am so grateful to have seen Dr. F, and for some people, having a label feels like a cage, and for some people, having a label feels like freedom and feels relieving. And for me, I'm the latter. I needed that label to finally have on paper to show other doctors, this is what I'm dealing with. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I feel extremely validated, extremely at peace now. Knowing what's wrong with me is half the battle. So now all I need to do is research common comorbidities of people that are hypermobile, so that if something were to worsen with me, I know kind of where to go. There's not one single doctor that you go to help with EDS or hypermobility. Most of the specialties have come across patients that have EDS, whether or not they know it. Most of the time these specialists are working on people with EDS, and they'll never know it. So more awareness, that is the key. And I will be coming back to update y'all with my additional genetic findings once I have the testing done to confirm everything. It was quite a bit of surprise that Dr. F thinks that I had an additional disorder, as well as something that I've kind of been researching a little bit that has to do with my heart. So we'll be talking about those two disorders in my next video. And any questions, feel free to DM me, message me. I am on Instagram at AnOrangeZebra, YouTube on at AnOrangeZebra, and TikTok at AnOrangeZebra. It is my life passion to raise awareness about EDS and hypermobility spectrum disorders. So please feel free to reach out. I enjoy talking to people, hearing other people's stories, especially people like me that have been suffering for years on end, decades on end, with no answers, that have finally gotten answers. Everybody wears this disorder so differently. Some people present very clinically, and some people present very unconventionally. And the spectrum of severity among this condition is extremely debilitated, extremely disabled, to mild or moderately disabled. So it is a spectrum disorder. No two people wear these stripes the same. And when I say stripes, I'm referring to the zebra, which is the EDS mascot. Medical students are taught that if you hear hoofbeats, you don't expect a zebra, you expect a horse, but sometimes you will find a zebra. Until next time, everyone, take care and thanks for tuning in.